Welcome to episode 3 of Valorem Visions. We're here with Steve Lazara, works in our security practice, and we're here to talk about securing AI frameworks for agents, also known as SAFE. Welcome, Steve. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Andrew. My name, as Andrew said, is Steve Lazara. I'm a senior security architect here at Valorem Reply in our security practice. My background actually started with help desk and operational work and moved into doing acquisitional work and data center design and build out, eventually becoming essentially an enterprise architect for several different Fortune 500 companies at that level. And now I am doing security here at Valorem Reply.
Awesome. Love to hear it, Steve. So we do a fun thing when we start these episodes is we have everybody kind of introduce their topic through whiteboard and do their best mouse drawing in whiteboard to kind of open up the topic. So I'll have you bring up whiteboard, share that to the audience here, and then we will start about a 2-minute timer to see how well your mouse drawing skills are in whiteboard.
All right. You know when you, okay, there it is.
We got it. All right.
All right.
I'm going to start the clock, Steve. You get at it. Let's see it.
So when you talk about securing, or the SAFE program, which is securing AI foundational, what you're looking at is right now we've got people and they're beginning to use kind of a new type of computer technology, which is the AI basis. And to do tasks, originally just started with helping them doing queries and things like Copilot, ChatGPT. Now we're doing a thing called an agent. And an agent is essentially a fake person inside of that little computer that does one thing really, really well. And you build that in two different fashions. One is, kind of a OBE or object-based coding methodology, and that uses Copilot for Studio. And then the next one is much more in-depth and detailed, more professional agents, if you will, and that is using the new Microsoft Foundry. And then those create and generate, as you go through, then you create this new tool. Think of it like a Roomba, but for doing computer stuff. It does one thing really, really well, and it runs through and vacuums up everything in your environment or everything in the internet to help do it. And so the parameters is that when you do this, you want to protect it so that what you don't pick up is you don't have it go and pick up a bunch of immaterial information or wrong information. And you really want to make certain that that's working appropriately from a user perspective. And then when these are being used inside of your business or company, you want to put a box around all of this to make certain that anything that comes out of there makes your company look good, is correct, and does not necessarily leak any information that shouldn't be there. But then you also want to be certain that as part of that box, we're securing kind of the feed into it to make certain that only the people within your company that should be using these tools has access to these tools. And of course, classically, you want to be certain that we protect the tools, the data that they're using, and any peripherals around it. A lot of that is called MCP servers, which are extraneous systems out here in the internet that kind of help provide logic that these use, telling that Roomba where to go vacuum and what type of formatting to use.
I love that analogy, Steve, and you got my mind racing on a bunch of analogies. The Roomba is really good because I know mine, it's kind of setting those boundaries, right? So you might have stairs, you may have places that you don't want it to go because it'll flip over and then it actually doesn't actually vacuum or do any good purpose, or transition to somewhere that it's sucking up papers and all my kids' glitter and crap on the floor that you don't want it doing either. So it's a really great analogy for kind of how these agents should operate. And now I will forever think of every agent that I create as a mini Roomba in the environment. The other thing that I thought about this in your drawing is if you rotate it a little bit, and it's kind of I get a little dabbled into electronics, and I never really thought about this, but it's essentially kind of like a diode, right? You want information flowing in one direction, and making sure that you're filtering it and making sure everything that comes out on the other side is usable and secure. So interesting, interesting drawing, and I love the analogy, Steve.
And it's very helpful in understanding how it works from that
Absolutely,
50,000 view.
absolutely. It's probably one of our better drawings. So a little pat on the back there, Steve. I know mouse drawing isn't the easiest thing to do. So good job there.
I get a lot of
So
practice.
so let's get into this. Let's just open up. Why do security leaders care about AI agents right now? You kind of opened it up as like you can create these agents that can just go wild. What are you and your group thinking about as it pertains to safe and in creating this foundational framework?
So the foundational framework for AI is the first step is how you look at it. We tend to view AI agents as another tool in the toolbox, and therefore, like anything else that has come out that's a tool in a user's toolbox, you have to ensure that it's used properly. It's really cool. It can do a lot of neat things. It's got a lot of great power to it, but the saying goes, with great power comes great responsibility. And
Sure.
that's one of the things that you want to have on that. So the first step is always ensuring that your user base is controlled as to who has access to it. If you what you don't want is you don't want somebody who shouldn't be doing these things coming in thinking that they know what they're doing and then inadvertently going in and creating a problem. So using multi-factor authentication, standard group control sets, just making certain that the people that have access to create agents are the people that you want to have create agents. That has been historically the same issues when PowerShell first got created. Other tools of that nature got created in an environment. Somebody goes and watches a YouTube video, says, "Oh, I know how to do this," and goes in and inadvertently creates a agent that goes out and grabs all the intellectual property from the company and
Yep.
spews it all over the place.
Yeah, it's
Again,
an interesting thing with technology, right? Is we just keep putting different names on it, but like creating an agent is no different than how we used to do it in PowerShell, right? In
yeah,
writing scripts and doing that, it's more up to the surface and user friendly, right? And so it's interesting. It's not a different problem. It is just at a higher accessibility and scale, and the ease of
yes,
use into getting into creating agents versus how do I even do PowerShell? How do I program? How do I use variables? You can just talk naturally to it, right? Which creates that even bigger surface for security to have to secure because anybody can do it now, right?
right. Yeah, especially with the usage of products such as Copilot Studio or object-based programming, which is zero code programming, means I can actually have the AI assist me in creating an agent to do
Yep.
what I think it wants to do, but you've got to be able to validate it. So the see the square that I put on there, you got to check the agent to make certain that it does, and you build that into how, which is how people do the work as standard operating processes, and you put that in as a methodology. So why you only want specific people doing that work. It's a little bit easier on Foundational Studio on Foundation Studio, Microsoft Foundation, Foundry, because it's not object-based coding. You actually have to be able to code.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's a little bit more complicated. Like, I can't give my 6-year-old Foundry to do the work, but my
Exactly.
6-year-old can get onto my work laptop and draw a little picture using little boxes, and suddenly there's a agent looking for, where how the kid can go buy a pony. The
Yeah.
An inappropriately controlled agent will go buy the pony. And suddenly you've got a pony at your house and you don't know where it came from. So you have to be careful of those different things.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about building a framework in kind of your guys' offering coming out into the market. What are some of the core components to this framework when you go in and you're talking to a new company that is getting into agents, want to know how to do it securely, right? From the foundation and building those. So what are some of the items that someone would use or we would consult them on establishing for that framework?
Well, yeah, we've commented on the identity controls of ensuring who can do what. Then you also have to get into saying, making sure that the agent what does the agent have access to? So that's two different things. One is your database. So you got your data down here, and you want to use products such as Purview or Coronis or any like data management system to
Sure.
label and protect your data to ensure that these agents can only see the data that you're allowing it to do. One of those recommendations is always to use what's called OBO, or on behalf of. So the agents will only run based on the user who's running it. Means that if they don't have access to the data, they can't see the data at all. The other thing is called an MCP server, which is a third-party product that assists in doing some advanced mathematics, advanced computational code pieces, and you only want to use trusted versions of those. So what we would
Sure.
do is we make sure that we set a boundary here for what MCP you have,
And maybe
and
maybe it's worth defining, because I just jumped into this rabbit hole, right, where I was creating agents, just calling, utilizing API keys, and using what an API could service, and then starting to get into MCP servers. Um, so maybe kind of dive into maybe that just real quick on the security behind an MCP server versus accessing APIs, because it kind of relates on that on behalf of term you were
you're
using.
okay. So an API is a connector.
Yep.
You're coding with an API, and you want to protect your API to say this is what it's allowed to connect to. So, for example, I really just wanted to connect to this LLM or large language model or this data set for what it can view. A really good example is, let's say I'm making an agent that's going to query on behalf of end users in, say, a car dealership shop. They're going to have their agent that they're going to use. It's going to help them pick out a car. So I want them to use this data set of specs about a car. So we're going to do an API. That API is only going to be able to query the data, tells it which data to go to, and it's only going to be allowed to come from these explicit consoles, which is the ones that you have in the showroom. And it's going to be locked down so that you cannot make changes to that API to ensure that nobody can do a man-in-the-middle attack or anything else to get to it. Then you have your data, and you've locked down your data to say so that nobody can inject additional data. And I'm going to use two main companies out there, Honda and Kia. You don't want anybody from Kia inserting information about Kias into your Honda database. So if you're at the Honda dealership and you're using this agent to find out what car to buy, you're only going to see Honda models.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
and then in addition to that is your MCP is where is it doing the kind of the thinking? Where is it doing that piece, that thought process, or it's in this case calculations because it's a computer, and the thought process between on the back end of the computer, you want it to can also determine where it might be pulling in from additional areas outside of there. So for example, if it's the car example here, I wanted to look at two things in particular. I wanted to go to Honda to get the specs, and I wanted to go to my dealership to get my inventory. Match inventory to specs for the responses around the qualifications that the person is querying about: seating, color, make, model, cost, pricing. Um, and then on both of those, you also want to do some filtering. So, for example, I don't want it to be able to, I don't want to, even consider conversations such as, why am I, why do I want to get a Honda instead of getting a Kia or a, Ford? I'm not going to even entertain that because I'm going to be filtering this to say you can tell me the query
Sure.
about the car, and I'll tell you the information about what we have, and what fits your criteria. And then for the output, you kind of do that same protectiveness. It's kind of an API, but it's basically the cloud output filter, which does the same thing. At a very early model of this, I actually did experience this at one of our local Honda dealerships. I put in my specs, and it did recommend a Kia. So that's how I kind of know that out there in the wild, these things at the very beginning are not being controlled or secured, and not just in like a security fashion. I wasn't trying to hack anything. I was trying to find a new car, and you really want your company, the product that you're generating, to really focus on your company and your environments and not necessarily
Sure.
drive business to your opponent, to your competitor.
So when you're looking at these, when you're establishing that kind of safe methodology and framework, are we encouraging people really to focus on MCP servers versus APIs from a security vector, or is there any preference on either one of those?
From a security vector, we really focus on a broader area. You focus on your ingress, you focus on your egress, and then internally you're going to focus on what data you have access to, anything external that you're referencing,
Sure.
and how you're referencing it. So it's very much the same classic good security hygiene. Ingress, egress of the environment or of the application.
Sure.
And then
Yep.
from within the application, it's what is it accessing? How is it accessing? What boundaries you want to put on it? Why does it access it? And then, of course, when you start talking about the limitations as to on behalf of is that to be allowed? Does that meet the parameters of what this is expected to do? So you have to have that defined strategic North Star of what this is going to do. And then you make certain that your input and your output match it, as well as then ensuring that everything in between isn't going anywhere you don't want it to go. And then the kind of the
Yeah.
final kicker on that, which is part of this ASAFE framework, is you put together a monitor that is able to check at every stage across the environment what is it doing, if it if there's a change, if there's a change in behavior of it, and if somebody's attempting to do anything inappropriately, who to alert, how do we quarantine it, how do we react, what is our automated react sessions, responses to this, so that throughout this entire piece we know who's doing what, where, with what, when, and what is our output going to be.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
because
you don't know.
it sounds like, right, there's always the base security foundations, right? You were talking the ingress, egress, how we connect in between there, but also just like anything, the monitoring piece is that big, even more prevalent with agents, right? Is you're kind of explaining here is because it's so open and yes, you can monitor, but it really companies are really looking to enable people to build these autonomous agents, right? It's going to be a benefit for companies down the road, right? You're going to live and die by them in the future, I believe. Um, and being able to have that monitoring, not only when something goes wrong, there's a breach or there's an anomaly, right? But that audit history of that visibility of who created, when was it created, how was it created, what does it reference, basically to come back and really get that security posture to know if something does happen, how wide is it, right? And how prevalent it is. So I'm imagining part of this framework is really focused on security, sure, but also the monitoring and auditing um, when something does happen.
And you kind of keyed in on there because people are building these on their own. You want to have those boundaries enforced automatically within the environment,
Yeah.
so that you're not going to be dependent on the person. You're dependent, it's built in, it's kind of built in guardrails. And then additionally, because people are building these things themselves, how often is it used? Who's using it? And when is it no longer of use to be able to clean up? And that brings up that concept of agent sprawl, which really hit home back in the SharePoint days and on Teams. We've always had that issue of when you open something up for the general populace to use, somebody can go in and create 50 agents because, wow, this is so cool, and use them once and never use them again. Well, now I've got 50 attack vectors there sitting there as a potential breach area. I want to clean those up. And so putting together your framework is also your governance about how AI is to be used in your environment, how agents are to be used in your environment, but then also setting those parameters to say, how long after somebody's no longer using it do we just get rid of this thing?
And that's a great point because I was just thinking too is, agents don't sleep, right? And if you have a bunch of stale agents and you don't have a good governance framework, there's one change to an API on access that you do for one agent, not thinking about the 50 others that are laying dormant, that as soon as you open that up, they are going to potentially use that data and serve it in a way not expected for what you were doing, right? And that governance piece is even more important because you have basically, as you stated, these potential attack vectors just sitting and waiting and pulling constantly. That one change, one promotion of a feature could ultimately change how stale agents that didn't have access now have access and serve it to an audience that it was not intended for, right?
Exactly. The degree of change in both compliance standards, but also in technology standards, technology capability, means leaving any legacy agent behind that is no longer in use becomes so much more of a threat because it might not have those qualifications around it. And the other piece on there is exactly what you said is which is a lot of times people forget is if you have a stale agent and you have somebody goes in and it's not an intentional harm piece. But we saw this a lot with the virtual desktops when they first came out in both Azure and that were, that you're paying consumption costs for. If somebody inadvertently, because they don't sleep, inadvertently leaves it running, now suddenly there's this big bill and you don't know where it came from, and you realize it's
Yeah.
because, somebody asked the agent to go find me a word that rhymes with orange, and it's just sat there and spinning, consuming utilization until it could find a word that rhymes with orange, which it'll never do. So it's just sitting there.
Yeah, absolutely. So really, as we think about this safe framework, and usually when I think about security, it's securing a specific vector, right? Is this safe framework that we're talking about today is actually really encompassing the full agent life cycle and how we deal with all of the from creation to audit to governance, and then also securing those foundational ingress egress in between on how we use that.
100%, Andrew. This is the transition of thought process around security. Historically, it would be just worrying about the ingress and the egress. But today's modernized environment, when you talk about a security, especially a framework of security that your company is going to be leveraging, you want to be go through the entire life cycle, the entire environmental piece of it. It's not just a matter of ingress and egress and necessarily what data they're using, but where's your exposure, where's your link, and you need to really count on the fact that anything in the environment is already breached, and you have to ensure that it's protected from a parallel movement into it. So you want to be
Sure.
certain that these, like for example, if I have an agent, I don't want somebody to be paralleling to jump onto that agent and then leverage what the agent can do without that on behalf of parameter. So you really need to pay attention to not just what the agent can do when it's working on behalf of somebody, but what the agent can do on its own. Because Skynet's not here today,
Yeah.
but you got to be certain that if something is running without that initial user guardrail, that it still doesn't have access to everything.
Yeah, it's interesting. The context that we've been speaking in is just mainly single agents, right? And really the world that we live in is multi-agent architecture. So that governance piece and creating that foundational structure is even more important, because while you open up something and one agent may be able to, as our previous point, access that, maybe that agent isn't going to provide it maliciously, but the three other agents that are talking to that agent, um, you have an end factor, right, to all of this as it goes. And so um, really, really important to kind of secure those. So Steve, I think you've outlined this great. I would love just to hear kind of a final wrap up on thoughts around safe and how your team goes in, implements, and thinks about this as we get into what I think this year will be a huge agent explosion across the industry.
Yeah, it's when our team comes in, the first thing we like to do is we like to sit down with the stakeholders and identify what's the purpose of the agents, how are they planning on using them, what's the strategic goals around these things. It's very much the learning why you're doing it, what does it fix, what's the goal for accomplishing it, and then working from that guidance to say, okay, now we're going to use the security tools, so use security best practices to then evaluate what you're doing to ensure that it's accomplishing what your company or you want it to do, how you're planning to using it, and then also blocking or preventing at that automatic level. So ensuring that it just isn't a physical capability for it to do what it shouldn't be doing in your environment, and then limiting it to the areas that you want it to be. And we look at it across the board, end to end of the entire life cycle. Scalability is added in there, and then it's also using traditional tools and the very basic foundational security principles of looking at it. This isn't a new security frontier. It is taking the current security parameters and understanding that it's no longer a single security vector view. You have to look environmentally end to end at all of the different security vectors and ensure that it's covered in every different, direction or area, or what it's doing. It's
Absolutely.
understanding it without impacting the business.
Yes. Well, without impacting the business, but also providing the availability to explore and build
Yeah.
upon it, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's going to be the tough part, right? And I think as you said, establishing the strong framework to make sure that you're playing inside the bounds and that you're safe, but also not restricting the business from growing and exploring and creating something that industry hasn't seen ever, right? Potentially.
And not being locked in, because the technology is going to be changing. So if you set up a
Yep.
framework, now you know what to do. And as new tools come along, as new products come along, as new security features come along, you're simply able to adapt those to your framework, basically letting the business of security drive the technology utilization, and not the technology utilization forcing you to continuously revamp your security.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Steve, it's been an absolute pleasure talking about safe and how you implement and how we're thinking about agents and governance and establishing strong security frameworks. Thanks
It's
again for your time, and we'll talk soon.
definitely. Thank you very much, Andrew.